Gather close and prepare yourself for one of gaming's darkest stories. What began as a simple horror game about surviving nights in a haunted pizzeria has evolved into something far more sinister. A decade-spanning tragedy of murdered children, a family torn apart by obsession and death, and a man whose crimes would echo through generations. This is the complete disturbing lore of Five Nights at Freddy's. The story doesn't begin with Freddy Fazbear's pizza, despite what you might think. It begins earlier, in the 1970s or early 1980s, with two men who shared a dream. Henry, Emily and William Afton were friends, business partners, and co-founders of a restaurant that would bring joy to children. They created Fredbear's Family Diner, a small establishment featuring two spring-lock animatronic suits, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, that could function both as animatronics and as wearable costumes for employees. The spring-lock technology was ingenious but dangerous. The suits contained dozens of spring-loaded mechanisms that would compress the animatronic parts when a person climbed inside, allowing a human to wear the suit and perform for children. But if the springs were triggered by moisture, sudden movement, or simple mechanical failure, they would snap back into place with tremendous force, driving metal rods and animatronic parts into the person wearing the suit. Henry Emily was the creative genius, the engineer who designed the animatronics and brought them to life. William Afton was the businessman, the charismatic partner who handled the financial side. Together, they created something magical. Children loved Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. Families flocked to the diner. Success seemed inevitable. But William Afton was not the man he appeared to be. Beneath the surface of his partnership with Henry, beneath his role as father and husband, something dark festered. William Afton was fascinated by death, not in the abstract philosophical sense, but in the mechanical, experimental sense. He looked at the animatronics he and Henry created and saw not entertainment but possibility. He saw vessels, he saw immortality. The first tragedy struck Henry's family directly. Charlotte Emily, Henry's daughter, was murdered outside Fredbear's Family Diner in what appeared to be a moment of cruel opportunity. The security puppet, a gift-giving animatronic designed to protect children, was trapped in its box by other children who had locked it inside as a prank. When Charlotte was locked outside in the rain, crying and alone, the puppet finally broke free, but too late. By the time it reached her, Charlotte was dead, her small body lying in the alley behind the restaurant. But something impossible happened in that alley. The puppet, driven by its programming to protect children, to give gifts and life, draped itself over Charlotte's body. And in that moment, whether through some property of the animatronic technology, through the sheer force of a child's dying consciousness, or through something we cannot explain, Charlotte's soul became bound to the puppet. She did not pass on. She remained trapped in the mechanical body, unable to speak, unable to cry, able only to watch through the puppet's hollow eyes. Then William Afton had not killed Charlotte Emily. That murder was committed by someone else, though the identity remains unclear in the fragmented timeline. But William saw what happened. He saw the impossible. He saw a dead child's soul inhabiting an animatronic. And in that moment of horror that should have broken any normal person, William Afton found his life's work. If a soul could inhabit an animatronic, then death was not the end. If consciousness could be preserved in metal and circuitry, then William Afton could achieve what no human had ever achieved: true immortality. But he needed to understand the process. He needed to experiment. He needed more subjects. The Afton family seemed normal from the outside. William had 3 children, Michael, the oldest son, Elizabeth, his daughter, and a younger son whose name has been lost to time, known only as the Crying Child. But the Afton household was not a happy one. William was distant, obsessed with his work, spending long hours at the restaurants conducting experiments that his family knew nothing about. His wife, whose name and fate remain mysterious, was absent from the children's lives in ways that suggest tragedy or abandonment. Michael, the oldest, dealt with his father's neglect by becoming a bully, tormenting his younger brother relentlessly, channeling his pain into cruelty. The Crying Child was terrified of the animatronics. While other children laughed and played at Fredbear's family diner, he cowered and wept. He had nightmares about them, visions of the animatronics coming to life in twisted, monstrous forms with sharp teeth and dead eyes. Whether he had seen something he shouldn't have, whether he had witnessed his father's experiments, or whether he simply possessed a child's intuition that something was deeply wrong, we cannot know. But his fear was profound and constant, a terror that consumed his young life. In 1983, the Crying Child's birthday party was held at Fredbear's family diner. Michael and his friends, wearing masks of Foxy, Bonnie, Chica and Freddy, decided to play a cruel prank on the birthday boy. They grabbed the Crying Child, who was screaming and struggling, begging them to stop, and carried him toward the stage where Fredbear was performing. The child cried that he didn't want to go near Fredbear, that he was scared, that they needed to put him down. But Michael and his friends laughed at his terror and lifted the child up, and shoving his head directly into Fredbear's mouth as a joke, thinking it would be funny to scare him. The spring locks failed. The sound of the mechanism snapping, the crunch of metal teeth closing, the screams that cut off into wet, choking silence. These are the sounds that haunt the FNAF timeline. The Crying Child's skull was crushed in Fredbear's jaws in front of a room full of children and parents. Blood and tears mixed on the diner floor. Michael Afton stood frozen, his brother's body limp in his arms, realizing too late what he had done, understanding in that horrible moment that his cruelty had killed his own brother. This event, known as the Bite of 83, destroyed what remained of the Afton family. The Crying Child was rushed to the hospital, where he lingered for days, his flatlining heartbeat monitored by machines. His father's voice promising, "I will put you back together," but the child died. And whether William Afton succeeded in putting him back together by binding his son's soul to an animatronic, possibly Golden Freddy, possibly something else, remains one of the law's most debated questions. What is certain is that William Afton, rather than being deterred by his son's death, became even more obsessed with his experiments. The Bite of 83 should have ended the Springlock suits forever. It should have closed Fredbear's family diner. But William Afton was not deterred. If anything, his son's death accelerated his obsession. He had seen death up close now. He had lost a child, and he became more determined than ever to conquer mortality itself, to prove that death could be overcome. That consciousness could persist beyond the destruction of the body. Fredbear's family diner closed, but the brand expanded. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opened, featuring new animatronics: Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie the Bunny, Chica the Chicken, and Foxy the Pirate Fox. The Springlock suits were retired from public use but kept in the back rooms as spare parts and emergency costumes. Henry Emily tried to move forward, to create something good from the tragedy, to honour his daughter's memory by bringing joy to other children. But William Afton had other plans. In 1985, William Afton committed the crime that would define the entire FNAF timeline, the Missing Children Incident. Wearing the Spring Bonnie suit, using the costume to gain the children's trust, William lured 5 children into the back room of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Their names were Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz and Cassidy. They followed the yellow rabbit, thinking it was part of the show, thinking they were going to see something special, something the other children wouldn't get to see. William Afton murdered all 5 children. The details of how he killed them are mercifully left vague in the lore, but the aftermath is clear. 5 children went missing from Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. 5 families were destroyed, left to wonder what happened to their sons and daughters. The police investigated, but William Afton was never charged. He was too careful, too clever, and possibly too well connected. The bodies were never found because William had hidden them in the only place no one would think to look, inside the animatronics themselves. He stuffed the children's bodies into the Freddy, Bonnie, Marichica and Foxy suits. The 5th child, Cassidy, was placed in a golden Freddy suit. The animatronics began to smell of decay and bodily fluids. Parents complained about the stench and the mucus and blood leaking from the animatronics' eyes and mouths. The restaurant tried to clean them, tried to explain it away as mechanical malfunctions, but the smell of death cannot be hidden forever. The location became known for its horrible odour, and business began to decline. And then the children's souls awakened. Just as Charlotte Emily's soul had inhabited the puppet, the 5 murdered children found themselves trapped in the animatronics that had become their tombs. They could not speak. They could not cry for help. They could only move the mechanical bodies they now inhabited, driven by confusion, pain, and a growing rage at the man who had killed them. They did not understand what had happened to them. They did not know they were dead. They only knew that they were trapped, that they hurt, and that a man in a uniform had hurt them. Charlotte Emily, still bound to the puppet, recognized what had happened. She'd been alone in her imprisonment, but now there were others, other children suffering as she had suffered. In the mini-games that reveal the lore, we see the puppet approaching the dead children, giving them gifts, the masks of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica and Foxy. She was giving them life, or what passed for life in their new existence. She was ensuring they would not be alone as she had been, that they would have some form of consciousness, some way to exist in their new mechanical prisons. The animatronics at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza began to move on their own at night. They wandered the halls searching for something they could no longer name. The children's souls, fragmented and confused, remembered only that a person had hurt them. They remembered the yellow rabbit, but they could not distinguish between the costume and the man inside. They could not tell the difference between William Afton and any other adult in a security guard uniform. To their broken, traumatized consciousness, every adult was a potential threat. Every person in uniform was possibly the man who had killed them. This is why the animatronics attack night guards. They are not evil. They are not monsters. They are murdered children who believe every adult they see might be the man who killed them. They are trying to protect themselves, trying to stop it from happening again, trying, in their broken, mechanical way, to find justice or revenge or simply to make the pain stop. When they stuff night guards into animatronic suits, they are not being cruel. They are trying to make the guards like them. trying to help them understand what it feels like to be trapped in metal and circuitry, unable to escape. But William Afton was not done. His experiments had succeeded beyond his wildest expectations. The children's souls had inhabited the animatronics, proving his theory correct. Death was not the end. Consciousness could be preserved. But William wanted more. He wanted to understand the mechanism. He wanted to extract whatever force, remnant he would later call it, that allowed souls to bind to metal. He wanted to weaponize it, to control it, to use it to achieve his ultimate goal of immortality. William Afton created Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, a sister location to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. This facility was different. While Freddy's was a public restaurant where families came to eat and play, Circus Baby's was designed for private parties and rentals, for exclusive events where the animatronics would be brought to homes and venues. The animatronics were more advanced, more sophisticated, equipped with cutting-edge technology that made them seem almost alive. But they were also far more sinister, because William Afton had designed them not to entertain children, but to kill them. Circus Baby, the star of the show, was beautiful and colourful, with a voice designed to soothe and attract children. She had bright red pigtails, a red and white dress, and a cheerful demeanour that made children want to approach her. But hidden in her chest cavity was a metal claw mechanism designed to grab a child, pull them inside, and kill them instantly. William Afton had built a murder machine disguised as a children's entertainer, an animatronic specifically engineered to capture and kill children for his experiments. He warned his daughter Elizabeth to stay away from Circus Baby. He told her never to go near the animatronic, that it was dangerous, that she needed to stay back. But Elizabeth was fascinated by the beautiful robot her father had created. She wanted to see Baby up close. She wanted to play with her. She didn't understand why her father wouldn't let her near the animatronic that seemed so friendly and inviting. One day, when Elizabeth was alone with Circus Baby, the animatronic activated. The voice spoke sweetly, inviting Elizabeth closer, telling her there was something special to see. And the claw shot out, grabbing William Afton's daughter and pulling her inside the machine with mechanical precision. Elizabeth Afton was killed by her father's own creation, her body hidden within Circus Baby's chest cavity, her life ended by the very technology her father had designed to kill other children. And just like the other children, Elizabeth's soul became bound to the animatronic. She became Circus Baby. Her consciousness merged with the machine that had killed her. But unlike the other children, Elizabeth retained more of her memories. She knew who she was. She knew who her father was. And she was trapped, unable to escape, forced to perform and entertain while her father's business continued. Then while other children came to see her, never knowing that the animatronic they were watching contained the soul of a murdered girl. William Afton had now lost 2 of his 3 children to the animatronics. Any normal person would have stopped. Any father would have been destroyed by grief, would have abandoned his experiments, would have realized that his obsession was destroying everything he touched. But William Afton was not normal, and his grief manifested as obsession rather than remorse. He closed Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental after Elizabeth's death, but he did not stop his experiments. He began to study Remnant, the substance or force that allowed souls to inhabit animatronics, with scientific precision and cold detachment. Remnant, as William understood it, was created through intense emotion. particularly the emotion of a dying child. It was the residue of consciousness, the echo of a soul that could be harvested, melted down, and injected into other objects. William Afton began to experiment with extracting remnant from the haunted animatronics, heating the metal to release the spiritual energy and using it to create new vessels for consciousness. He was treating souls like a natural resource, like something that could be mined and refined and used for his purposes. This is the true horror of William Afton. He was not simply a serial killer who murdered children for pleasure or power. He was a scientist who viewed children as raw materials for his experiments in immortality. Every child he killed was a step toward understanding death. Every soul he trapped was data for his research. He had lost his humanity entirely and replaced it with cold curiosity and ruthless ambition. His own children's deaths meant nothing to him, except as proof that his theories were correct. Meanwhile, Michael Afton, the oldest son, had grown into a young man haunted by what he had done to his brother. The bite of 83 had destroyed him psychologically. He had killed his own brother, even if accidentally, even if he had only meant to scare him. His father had become distant and obsessed, barely acknowledging Michael's existence. His sister had died in a mysterious accident at Circus Baby's. Michael was alone, guilt-ridden, and desperate for some kind of redemption, some way to make amends for the terrible thing he had done. William Afton gave his son a mission. He sent Michael to Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, which had been closed to the public but was still operating as a maintenance facility. William told Michael to find Elizabeth, to put her back together, though what he truly wanted remains unclear. Was William trying to free his daughter's soul? Was he sending Michael to retrieve remnant? Or was he simply using his son as another test subject, another piece in his experiments? Michael took a job as a technician at the facility, working night shifts to maintain the animatronics. But Circus Baby, inhabited by Elizabeth's soul, had her own plans. She and the other animatronics at the facility, known as the Fun Times, had been scooped of their endoskeletons before, their parts removed and studied by William Afton. They knew what it felt like to be torn apart, to be treated as objects rather than beings, and they wanted to escape. Over the course of 5 nights, Circus Baby guided Michael through the facility, speaking to him through the intercom, giving him instructions. She told him she could help him. She told him to trust her. She recognized him as her brother, but she also saw him as an opportunity, a way to escape the facility that had become her prison. And on the final night, she led him to the scooping room. The scooper was a massive machine designed to remove the endoskeletons from animatronics for maintenance and study. It was a brutal device, essentially a giant ice cream scoop that would tear out the internal mechanisms of an animatronic in one violent motion. Circus Baby told Michael that he needed to be scooped, that it was the only way, that he had to trust her. And Michael, whether out of trust, desperation, or resignation, whether he knew what was about to happen or simply didn't care anymore, allowed it to happen. The scooper tore out Michael Afton's internal organs in one brutal motion. He should have died instantly. But the Funtime animatronics, led by Circus Baby, had merged their endoskeletons into a single entity called Enard, a tangled mass of wires and metal and consciousness. And Enard climbed inside Michael's hollowed-out body, wearing his skin like a costume, using his corpse as a disguise to escape the facility. For weeks, Enard piloted Michael's body through the streets, pretending to be human, walking among people who had no idea that the person they were seeing was actually a corpse being controlled by animatronic parts. But a corpse cannot maintain itself. Michael's skin turned purple and began to rot. His body decayed from the inside out, the smell becoming unbearable, and eventually Ennard realized the disguise was failing. In a sewer, Ennard ejected itself from Michael's body, leaving the corpse to collapse on the ground, empty and broken. But Michael Afton did not stay dead. Whether through remnant that had been injected into him during the scooping process, through sheer force of will, or through some property of the Afton bloodline itself, Michael's corpse stood back up. His eyes opened. His purple, rotting body began to move. He had become something neither alive nor dead. A walking corpse animated by consciousness, a zombie in all but name. He was a medical impossibility, a violation of natural law, but he was conscious and aware. Michael Afton looked at his reflection in the sewer water and realized what he'd become, and he made a decision. If he could not die, if he was cursed to walk the earth in this rotting shell, then he would use his unnatural life to hunt down his father and end William Afton's crimes once and for all. He would spend however long it took to find his father and stop him, to prevent any more children from suffering as he and his siblings had suffered. This is where Michael's journey truly begins. He took jobs at various Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations, working as a night guard, trying to track down his father. He endured the attacks of the haunted animatronics, night after night, knowing they were trying to kill him because they thought he was William. He could not explain to them that he was different, that he was trying to help. He could only survive and continue his search, driven by guilt and determination. William Afton, meanwhile, had become aware that the animatronics were haunted. He knew the children's souls were trapped inside and he wanted to study them, to extract their remnant for his experiments. He returned to the abandoned Freddy Fazbear's pizza location and began to dismantle the animatronics one by one, tearing apart Freddy, Bonnie, Chica and Foxy to get at the remnant inside. He was destroying the very vessels that contained the children's souls, treating them as nothing more than containers for the substance he needed. But the children's souls were freed when their animatronic bodies were destroyed, and they were angry. The spirits of the 5 murdered children manifested in the safe room where William was working, appearing as ghostly, translucent versions of the animatronics. They surrounded him, backing him into a corner. William Afton, for the first time in his life, felt genuine fear. He had always been in control, always been the one with power, but now he was trapped, surrounded by the ghosts of the children he had murdered, and they were closing in. He looked around desperately for an escape and saw the old Spring Bonnie suit hanging on the wall, the same suit he had worn to lure the children to their deaths decades ago. In a moment of panic, William climbed into the Spring Bonnie suit, thinking it would protect him, thinking the children would not recognize him inside the costume, thinking he could hide from their vengeance. But the safe room was leaking. Water dripped from the ceiling, moisture accumulating in the air, and the spring locks, dormant for years, were triggered by the moisture and William's panicked movements. The suit came alive around William Afton. Dozens of spring-loaded mechanisms snapped into place, driving metal rods through his body, impaling him from the inside. The animatronic parts crushed his organs, pierced his lungs, shattered his bones. Metal rods burst through his chest and back. The suit's jaws closed around his face, teeth piercing his skull. William Afton screamed, but the suit's mechanisms cut off the sound, filling his mouth with blood and metal. He collapsed to the floor, blood pooling around the Spring Bonnie suit, dying in the same way his son had died, killed by the very technology he had helped create. The children's spirits watched him die. They watched him suffer. And then they faded, believing their murderer was finally dead, believing they could finally rest, believing that justice had been served, and they could move on to whatever came next. But William Afton did not die. Just as the children's souls had inhabited the animatronics, William Afton's soul became bound to the Spring Bonnie suit. His consciousness, fueled by rage and hatred and an absolute refusal to accept death, clung to the metal and circuitry. He remained aware, trapped in the suit, unable to move, unable to speak, impaled on dozens of metal rods, feeling every moment of agony. His body was destroyed, but his mind persisted, experiencing endless pain in the darkness. The safe room was sealed by the restaurant's owners, who wanted to hide the evidence of what had happened there. The location was abandoned, and William Afton, now known as Springtrap, remained in that room for 30 years, alone in the dark, slowly going mad. He could not move. He could not scream. He could only think, trapped in his own mind, experiencing the consequences of his actions in the most direct way possible. 30 years later, a new business opened. Fazbear's Fright, a horror attraction designed to capitalize on the dark legend surrounding Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The owners wanted to create an authentic experience, to give horror fans a taste of the real locations where the tragedies had occurred. They searched the old locations for authentic props and decorations, anything that would add to the atmosphere, and they found Springtrap in the sealed safe room, thinking he was just an old, damaged animatronic suit, not realizing they had found William Afton himself. They brought Springtrap to Fazbear's Fright, and William Afton awakened. He could move again. The decades of immobility had not killed him. If anything, they had made him stronger, more determined, more filled with hatred. He began to hunt the night guard at Fazbear's Fright, driven by a need to kill, to continue his work, to prove that he could not be stopped. He was no longer human in any meaningful sense. He was a monster, a corpse in a suit, animated by pure malice. But Michael Afton was still searching for his father, and when he learned about Fazbear's Fright, when he heard rumours of an old animatronic that moved on its own, he knew William would be there. On the final night, Michael burned the horror attraction to the ground, trying to kill Springtrap, trying to end his father's existence once and for all. He watched the building collapse in flames, watched the fire consume everything inside. The building collapsed in flames. Springtrap was consumed by fire. But when the ashes cooled and investigators searched the ruins, they found no body. William Afton had escaped, his charred and damaged form crawling from the wreckage, still refusing to die, still driven by his obsession. The fire had burned away most of his remaining flesh, leaving him as little more than a skeleton in a burned suit, but he persisted. Henry Emily, who'd been in hiding for decades, devastated by the loss of his daughter and the corruption of his life's work, decided it was time to end the nightmare. He'd watched from the shadows as William's crimes continued, as more children suffered, as the animatronics he had created with love and care became instruments of tragedy. He created one final restaurant, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, as a location designed not to entertain children, but to trap the haunted animatronics. Henry lured them all to the location. He brought in Circus Baby, now separated from Ennard and operating independently, still inhabited by Elizabeth's soul. He brought in Molten Freddy, the amalgamation of the funtime animatronics that had become Ennard. He brought in the puppet, still inhabited by Charlotte's soul, still trying to protect children even after all these years. And he waited for Springtrap, knowing William Afton could not resist one final chance to continue his work, one final opportunity to experiment with the haunted animatronics. Michael Afton took a job as manager of the location, knowing it was a trap, knowing he would not survive. But he was tired. He'd been walking as a corpse for decades, hunting his father, trying to make amends for what he had done to his brother. He wanted to rest. He wanted it to be over. On the final night, Henry Emily activated the facility's hidden systems. Metal walls slammed down, sealing all the exits. The temperature began to rise as hidden incinerators activated. Henry spoke through the intercom, addressing each of the trapped souls in turn. He apologized to his daughter Charlotte for failing to protect her, for not being there when she needed him. He told the murdered children that they could finally rest, that their suffering was ending. He told Michael that he had done well, that he had tried to make things right, that he could finally be at peace. And he told William Afton that this was the end. There would be no escape this time, no more experiments, no more murders. The fire would consume everything, of burning hot enough to destroy the remnant itself, releasing the souls and ending William's existence. This was not revenge. This was mercy. Mercy for the children who had suffered, mercy for the souls that had been trapped, and even mercy for William, who would finally be forced to face the consequences of his actions. The building burned. The animatronics were destroyed. The souls of the children trapped for so long were finally freed. Charlotte Emily, Michael Afton, and the 5 murdered children passed on. Their suffering ended at last. They had been prisoners for decades, but now they were free. But in the deepest part of the fire, in the hottest flames, William Afton's consciousness persisted. His body was destroyed, burned to ash and bone. But his soul, saturated with remnant, infused with decades of hatred and obsession, near refused to let go. He fell into a nightmare, a purgatory of his own creation, where he was hunted by twisted versions of the animatronics he'd created, killed over and over again in an endless loop of torment. This nightmare realm, known as Ultimate Custom Night, may be William Afton's final fate, an eternity of suffering, unable to die, unable to escape, tormented by the souls of the children he murdered. He experiences death repeatedly, killed by the animatronics in countless ways, only to wake up and experience it again. It is the perfect punishment for a man who sought immortality. He got what he wanted, but it became his hell. Or it may be something else, a transitional state before his consciousness found a new vessel. Because the story does not end with the fire. Years later, a corporation called Fazbear Entertainment attempted to rebuild the brand's reputation by creating a virtual reality game that would make light of the old rumours, turning the tragedies into entertainment. They wanted to rebrand the horror, to make it fun and marketable, to profit from the legends of haunted animatronics and missing children. They scanned old circuit boards from the animatronics to create realistic AI for the game, thinking they were just copying programming and behavioural patterns. But one of those circuit boards contained a fragment of William Afton's consciousness, a piece of his soul that had survived the fire embedded in the circuitry like a virus. The fragment became a digital entity known as Glitchtrap. It infected the VR game and began to manipulate the game's testers. He's trying to find a way back into the physical world. Glitchtrap could influence people, make them see things, make them do things. It was William Afton, reduced to code and data, but still trying to continue his work, still trying to achieve immortality, still refusing to accept defeat. He had become something new, not a physical being, but a digital consciousness that could infect technology and minds alike. One of the game testers, a woman named Vanessa, became Glitchtrap's primary target. The virus infected her mind, manipulating her thoughts, showing her visions, gradually taking control of her actions. She became Vanny, a killer in a rabbit costume, continuing William Afton's legacy of child murder in a new era. She was not acting of her own free will. She was a puppet, controlled by the digital remnant of William Afton. Forced to carry out his work decades after his physical death, the horror continues, the cycle repeats. Because William Afton's obsession with immortality has made him unkillable in the traditional sense, he exists now as a concept, a virus, a fragment of consciousness that can infect technology and people alike. He's become the very thing he sought to create, a soul that cannot die, that persists beyond the destruction of the body, that can transfer from vessel to vessel. But this immortality is not the triumph William Afton imagined. It is a curse. He is trapped in an existence of endless suffering, unable to rest, unable to escape the consequences of his actions. The children he murdered have found peace. His own children have found peace. But William Afton will never know peace. He will exist forever in fragments, in nightmares, in the code of machines, always trying to return, always failing, always suffering. This is the disturbing lore of Five Nights at Freddy's. It is not a story about haunted animatronics or jump scares. It is a story about a man who destroyed everything he touched in pursuit of immortality, who murdered children to fuel his experiments, who lost his own family to his obsession. It is a story about the souls of innocent children trapped in mechanical bodies, seeking justice they can never fully achieve. It is a story about the cost of trying to conquer death, and the realization that some fates are worse than dying. The animatronics are not the monsters in this story. William Afton is the monster, and the true horror is that his crimes echo through generations, that his victims can never fully escape, that the cycle of tragedy continues long after everyone involved should have found rest. The children died decades ago, but their suffering persists. William Afton died decades ago, but his evil persists. The tragedy is eternal, trapped in a loop as inescapable as the animatronic suits that became the children's prisons. In the end, Five Nights at Freddy's asks a simple but profound question. What would you sacrifice for immortality? William Afton sacrificed everything. His family, his humanity, his soul, and he achieved his goal. He cannot die, but he also cannot live. He exists in a state between, forever trapped by his own ambition, forever haunted by the children he murdered, forever experiencing the consequences of his refusal to accept the natural order of life and death. The animatronics still move in the dark. The children's souls still linger, some freed, some still trapped. And somewhere, in the code of a machine or the nightmare of a purgatory, William Afton still exists, still trying to escape, still refusing to accept that some things should remain dead. He has achieved immortality, but it is an immortality of suffering, of endless torment, of being unable to escape the hell he created for himself and others. This is the legacy of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. This is the truth behind the jump scares and the mini-games. This is the disturbing lore that has captivated millions of players, A tragedy so dark and so complete that it transforms a simple horror game into something far more profound. It is a story that resonates because it touches on fundamental human fears. The fear of death, the fear of losing our children, the fear of becoming monsters, the fear that our actions will have consequences we cannot escape. The story of Five Nights at Freddy's is a warning. It tells us that death is not the enemy. Obsession is the enemy. The refusal to accept loss, to accept mortality, to accept that some things cannot be controlled. This is what creates monsters. William Afton could have been a good father, a good partner, a good man, but he chose to pursue immortality at any cost. And the cost was everything. The children deserved better. Charlotte Emily deserved to grow up with her father, to live a full life, to experience all the joys and sorrows that come with being human. The 5 missing children, Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz and Cassidy, deserved to live their lives, to grow up, to have families of their own. And Elizabeth Afton deserved a father who would protect her, not build machines to kill her. The crying child deserved a family that would keep him safe, a brother who would love him instead of torment him. Michael Afton deserved a chance to be more than a walking corpse seeking redemption for a childhood mistake. They all deserved better. But William Afton took that from them, and in doing so he created a hell that trapped not just his victims, but himself. He became the architect of his own eternal punishment, the creator of a nightmare from which he can never wake. His pursuit of immortality became his damnation. The animatronics will always be watching. The children will always be waiting. And William Afton will never escape the consequences of what he has done. This is the disturbing lore of Five Nights at Freddy's, a story of horror or tragedy and the terrible price of trying to live forever. It is a story that reminds us that some boundaries should not be crossed, that some knowledge should not be pursued, that some ambitions should be abandoned before they consume us entirely. In the quiet moments, when you're alone in the dark, you might hear the sound of mechanical footsteps. You might see a shadow move where no shadow should be. You might feel the presence of something watching, something that was once human but has become something else entirely. That is the legacy of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. That is the echo of William Afton's crimes, and that is why, decades after the first murder, the story continues. Because some horrors are too great to be forgotten, some tragedies are too profound to be buried, and some souls, both victim and perpetrator, can never truly rest. The children remain, in memory if not in spirit, reminders of innocence destroyed. William Afton remains, in whatever form he now takes, a reminder of what humans can become when they lose their humanity. The lore of Five Nights at Freddy's is disturbing not because of blood or violence, but because it reflects a truth about human nature. That obsession can transform love into horror, that the pursuit of immortality can create a fate worse than death, and that the innocent always pay the price for the sins of the ambitious. It is disturbing because it shows us that the real monsters are not the supernatural entities or the haunted machines, but the humans who create them, who use them, who sacrifice others for their own goals. This is the complete chronicle. This is the full tragedy. This is the disturbing lore that has made Five Nights at Freddy's more than just a game. It has made it a modern horror legend, a cautionary tale about the dangers of refusing to accept our own mortality. It has resonated with millions because it taps into primal fears and fundamental questions about what it means to be human, what it means to die, and what it means to persist beyond death. The animatronics are still out there, in abandoned buildings and sealed rooms, in virtual reality and in nightmares. The children's souls are still seeking justice, or peace, or simply an end to their suffering. And William Afton, in whatever form he now takes, is still trying to escape the hell he created for himself, still trying to achieve the immortality he sought, never realizing that he already has it, and that it is his punishment, yet not his reward. The story of Five Nights at Freddy's will continue as long as people remember it, as long as we tell the tale of the murdered children and the man who killed them, as long as we understand that some horrors are too important to forget. The franchise has expanded beyond the original games, spawning sequels and spin-offs and novels and films, each adding new layers to the tragedy, new perspectives on the horror. But at its core, it remains the same story. Children were murdered, their souls were trapped, and the man who killed them achieved immortality at the cost of his humanity. So remember Charlotte Emily, the first victim, the girl who became the puppet and tried to save the others. Remember Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz and Cassidy, the 5 children who followed a yellow rabbit and never came home. And remember Elizabeth Afton, killed by her father's creation, trapped in Circus Baby. Remember the crying child whose name we don't even know, killed by his brother's prank and his father's dangerous technology. Remember Michael Afton, who spent his undead life trying to make things right, trying to stop his father, trying to find redemption for a mistake he made as a child. Remember them all, because they deserve to be remembered. They were real people in the story's universe, with lives and families and futures that were stolen from them. They were children who should have grown up, who should have had the chance to live and love and make their own choices. Instead, they became trapped in a nightmare, victims of one man's obsession with conquering death. And remember William Afton, not as a villain to be celebrated or admired, but as a warning of what we can become when we lose our humanity in pursuit of the impossible. Remember him as a cautionary tale about obsession, about the refusal to accept natural limits, about the willingness to sacrifice others for our own goals. He is not a hero. He is not even an anti-hero. He is a monster who created himself, who chose his path, who destroyed everything he touched. This is the disturbed lore of Five Nights at Freddy's. This is the story that needed to be told. And now, in the darkness, the animatronics wait. They have always been waiting, and they will wait forever, guardians of a tragedy that can never be undone, witnesses to crimes that can never be forgiven. They are monuments to suffering, reminders of innocence lost, symbols of the price we pay when we refuse to accept the natural order of things. The horror is not in the jump scares, though they are effective. The horror is not in the creepy animatronics, though they are unsettling. The horror is in the truth, and the truth is that William Afton succeeded in his quest for immortality. But immortality, as it turns out, is the cruelest punishment of all. He wanted to live forever, and he does. But he lives in torment, in fragments, in nightmares, unable to rest, unable to escape, unable to undo what he has done. The children wanted to live, and they were denied that chance. William Afton wanted to never die, and he was granted that wish. The irony is perfect and terrible. The children who deserved life were given death. William Afton, who deserved death, was given eternal life. And both fates are forms of suffering, both are punishments, as both are consequences of William Afton's actions. This is what makes the lore of Five Nights at Freddy's truly disturbing. It is not the violence or the horror imagery, it is the fundamental injustice of it all. It is the fact that innocent children suffered for the ambitions of an evil man. It is the fact that the victims cannot fully escape their suffering even in death. It is the fact that the perpetrator cannot escape his punishment even though he achieved his goal. Everyone is trapped, everyone is suffering, and there is no easy resolution, no simple happy ending. The franchise continues to explore this tragedy from new angles, introducing new characters and new timelines, but the core remains the same. Children died, souls were trapped, a man's obsession destroyed everything, and the consequences echo through time, affecting new generations, creating new victims, perpetuating the cycle of horror. In the most recent entries in the franchise, we see William Afton's influence extending into the digital realm, into virtual reality, into new forms of technology. He has become a virus, a glitch, a corrupting influence that can infect minds and machines. He is no longer bound by physical form. He is an idea, a malevolent consciousness that persists in the spaces between reality and simulation. And this makes him more dangerous than ever, because he can reach more people, influence more victims, continue his work in ways that were impossible when he was merely a physical being. Vanessa, the game tester who became Vanny, represents a new kind of victim. She's not a child, she's an adult with agency and awareness, but she is still a victim, controlled by William Afton's digital remnant, forced to carry out his will. This shows that William's evil is not limited to children, that his influence can corrupt anyone, that his obsession with immortality has made him a threat to all of humanity, not just the vulnerable children he originally targeted. The story asks us to consider what it means to be human, what it means to have a soul, what it means to persist beyond death. Are the children still themselves, trapped in the animatronics? Or have they become something else, their identities fragmented and distorted by decades of imprisonment? Is William Afton still William Afton, or has he become something entirely new, a digital entity that merely remembers being human? These are not easy questions, and the franchise does not provide easy answers. Instead, it presents us with a horror that is philosophical as well as visceral, a tragedy that makes us think as well as feel. It challenges us to consider the nature of consciousness, the ethics of experimentation, the consequences of refusing to accept natural limits. The animatronics themselves are tragic figures. They are both victims and threats, both innocent and dangerous. They attack night guards not out of malice, but out of confusion and fear. They are children who don't understand what has happened to them, who are trying to protect themselves, who are lashing out at a world that has become incomprehensible. They deserve our sympathy, even as they inspire our fear. And this is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the lore. There are no simple villains and heroes. William Afton is clearly evil, but even he began as a human being with dreams and ambitions. The animatronics are clearly dangerous, but they are also victims. Michael Afton tries to be a hero, but he is also responsible for his brother's death. Henry Emily tries to create joy, but his creations become instruments of tragedy. Everyone is complicit, everyone is suffering, everyone is trapped in a cycle they cannot escape. The lore of Five Nights at Freddy's is disturbing because it reflects the complexity of real horror. It shows us that tragedy is not simple, that suffering is not clean, that there are no easy resolutions to the problems we create. It shows us that our actions have consequences that extend far beyond what we can imagine, that our obsessions can destroy not just ourselves but everyone around us. Either that the pursuit of impossible goals can create hells we never intended. William Afton wanted to conquer death. Instead, he created a world where death is inescapable, but also incomplete, where souls linger in torment, where the boundary between life and death becomes blurred and horrifying. He wanted to preserve consciousness forever. Instead, he created a nightmare where consciousness becomes a curse, where awareness means experiencing endless suffering, where immortality is indistinguishable from damnation. The children wanted to play, to laugh, to enjoy their childhoods. Instead, they became prisoners in metal bodies, unable to speak or cry, able only to wander and attack and suffer. They wanted life. They got a twisted parody of it, an existence that is neither life nor death but something horrible in between. This is the disturbing lore of Five Nights at Freddy's. It is a story about the price of ambition, the cost of obsession, and the terrible consequences of refusing to accept the natural order of things. It is a story that has resonated with millions because it taps into fundamental fears and asks profound questions about what it means to be human, what it means to die, and what it means to persist beyond death. The animatronics will continue to haunt us. The children's souls will continue to seek peace. And William Afton will continue to exist in whatever form he now takes, forever trapped by his own ambition, forever suffering the consequences of his refusal to accept mortality. This is his legacy. This is his punishment. This is his immortality. And in the end, we are left with the simple truth. Death is not the enemy. No, the enemy is the refusal to accept death, the obsession with conquering it, the willingness to sacrifice others in pursuit of immortality. William Afton's story is a warning about what happens when we lose sight of our humanity, when we treat others as means to our ends, when we refuse to accept the limits that define us as human beings. The disturbing lore of Five Nights at Freddy's will endure because it speaks to something fundamental in the human experience. We all fear death. We all wonder what comes after. We all struggle with the knowledge that our time is limited. But the story reminds us that some boundaries exist for a reason, that some knowledge is too dangerous to pursue, that some ambitions should be abandoned before they consume us. The children deserved better. We all deserve better. But the story of Five Nights at Freddy's shows us what happens when one person decides that their goals are more important than the lives and suffering of others. It shows us the consequences of that decision, played out across decades, affecting generations, creating a cycle of horror that seems impossible to break. This is the complete, disturbing lore of Five Nights at Freddy's. This is the tragedy that has captivated millions. This is the horror that goes beyond jump scares and creepy animatronics to touch something deeper, something more profound, something that resonates with our fundamental fears and questions about existence, mortality, and the nature of consciousness itself. The story continues, the horror persists, and the animatronics wait in the darkness, eternal guardians of a tragedy that can never be undone, the witnesses to crimes that can never be forgiven, monuments to the terrible price of one man's obsession with living forever. The locations themselves tell stories of decay and corruption. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, once a place of joy and celebration, became a tomb. The building that should have echoed with children's laughter instead echoed with the mechanical footsteps of haunted animatronics. The party rooms where families gathered became hunting grounds. The prize corner where children collected tickets became the domain of the puppet, Charlotte Emily's prison. Every inch of the restaurant was corrupted by William Afton's crimes, transformed from a place of innocence into a monument to his evil. The safe room where William died is particularly significant. It was a hidden space, not marked on any floor plan, invisible to both customers and most employees. This is where the spring-lock suits were stored, where employees would change in and out of the costumes. It was a liminal space, neither public nor truly private, a room that existed in the gaps of the building's official layout. And it became William Afton's tomb, the place where he would spend 30 years trapped in the spring Bonnie suit, impaled and suffering, unable to move or scream or die. Imagine those 30 years. William Afton, conscious but immobile, feeling every metal rod piercing his body, experiencing constant agony with no hope of relief. The safe room was sealed, so no light entered. No sound from the outside world reached him. He existed in absolute darkness and silence, with nothing but his own thoughts and his endless pain, for 3 decades, where he had nothing to do but think about what he had done, about the children he had murdered, about the family he had destroyed. But even that suffering did not lead to remorse. When he was finally freed, when Fazbear's Fright opened and he could move again, his first instinct was to kill. He had learned nothing. He had changed nothing. He remained a monster. The night guards who worked at the various Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations were victims in their own right. They took jobs thinking they would be watching over an empty restaurant, maybe dealing with the occasional break-in. Instead, they found themselves hunted by animatronics that moved with purpose and malice. They spent 5 nights, sometimes more, trapped in a security office, watching cameras, closing doors, trying to survive until 6 a.m. Many of them died. Where the animatronics would stuff their bodies into spare suits, just as William Afton had stuffed the children's bodies into the main animatronics. The cycle of violence continued, creating new victims, new tragedies. Phone Guy, the employee who left training messages for the night guards, represents the corporate complicity in the horror. He knew the animatronics were dangerous. He knew about the bite of 87, about the springlock failures, about the missing children. But he continued to work for Fazbear Entertainment, continued to train new night guards, continued to downplay the danger. His cheerful voice on the phone messages, explaining how to survive the night while making it sound like a minor inconvenience, is its own kind of horror. He normalized the abnormal, made the deadly seem manageable, and eventually, he too was killed by the animatronics, his screams captured on a phone message that would play for future night guards. Fazbear Entertainment, the corporation behind the restaurants, bears significant responsibility for the tragedies. They knew about the murders. They knew about the haunted animatronics. They knew about the danger to employees and customers. But they prioritized profit over safety, reputation over justice. They covered up the crimes, sealed the safe room, continued to operate even as children went missing and employees died. The company's willingness to sacrifice human lives for financial gain makes them complicit in William Afton's crimes. They may not have murdered anyone directly, but they created the conditions that allowed the murders to continue, that allowed the horror to persist. The bite of 87, distinct from the bite of 83 that killed the crying child, represents another failure of corporate responsibility. An animatronic bit someone's frontal lobe, causing severe brain damage. This incident should have shut down all Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations permanently. Instead, the company simply restricted the animatronics' movements during the day, keeping them on stage, preventing them from wandering. They continued to operate, continued to expose children and employees to danger, continued to prioritize profit over safety. The bite of 87 was a warning that went unheeded, another tragedy in a long line of tragedies that the company chose to ignore. The mini-games that reveal the lore are themselves disturbing in their simplicity. They show the murders in pixelated abstract form, children following the yellow rabbit, like children lying dead, the puppet giving gifts. The low-resolution graphics make the horror more unsettling rather than less, because they force the player to imagine the details, to fill in the gaps with their own worst fears. The minigames are like fragments of memory, incomplete and distorted, showing just enough to convey the tragedy without showing everything. They are the children's perspective, confused and fragmented, unable to fully process what happened to them. The music boxes that appear throughout the series carry their own significance. The puppet is kept docile by a music box that must be wound regularly. When the music stops, the puppet awakens and hunts. This mechanic reflects Charlotte Emily's nature. She is not inherently violent, but she cannot rest. The music box is like a lullaby, keeping her calm, but when it stops, she remembers what happened to her, remembers that she died alone in the rain, and she seeks out the night guard. It's not revenge she wants, but connection, someone to share her suffering. The music box is both a comfort and a prison, keeping her in a state between sleep and waking, between peace and torment. The various iterations of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza show the evolution of the horror. The original location, where the missing children incident occurred, was eventually closed. A new location opened, with new animatronics, the toy animatronics, designed to be more child-friendly, equipped with facial recognition software linked to criminal databases. But even these new animatronics became corrupted, either by the presence of the original haunted animatronics in the back room, or by new crimes committed at the location. The horror could not be escaped by simply opening a new restaurant. It followed the brand, infected every location, turned every attempt at a fresh start into a new nightmare. Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction, represents a particularly cynical exploitation of tragedy. The owners knew about the dark history of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. They knew about the missing children, the murders, the haunted animatronics, and they decided to profit from it, to turn real tragedy into entertainment. They searched the old locations for props, for anything that would add authenticity to their horror attraction, and they found Springtrap, thinking he was just a damaged animatronic suit, not realizing they had brought William Afton himself into their attraction. Their exploitation of tragedy led directly to more death. As Springtrap hunted the night guard, continuing his work even decades after his supposed death. The fire that destroyed Fazbear's Fright was Michael Afton's attempt to end the nightmare. He had been searching for his father for years, working as a night guard at various locations, enduring attacks from the haunted animatronics, trying to find William and stop him. When he learned about Fazbear's Fright, when he realized Springtrap was there, he knew what he had to do. He burned the building down, trying to kill his father, trying to end the cycle of horror. But fire alone was not enough. William Afton escaped, his burned and damaged form crawling from the wreckage, still refusing to die. Henry Emily's final plan was more comprehensive. He didn't just want to destroy the animatronics, he wanted to free the souls trapped inside them. He redesigned Freddy Fazbear's pizza place as a labyrinth, a maze that would lure all the haunted animatronics to one location. He brought in Circus Baby, Molten Freddy, the puppet, and waited for Springtrap. He created a job listing that would attract Michael, knowing his son would come, knowing Michael was still searching for William, and on the final night, Henry activated the trap. The building became an incinerator, burning hot enough to destroy not just the physical animatronics, but the remnant itself, the spiritual energy that bound the souls to the metal. Henry's final speech is a moment of profound emotion in a story filled with horror. He addresses each soul individually, acknowledging their suffering, offering them peace. He apologizes to Charlotte, his daughter, for failing to protect her. He tells her it's time to rest, time to let go. He tells the other children that they can finally be free, that their suffering is ending. He tells Michael that he has done well, that he tried to make things right, that he can finally find peace. And he tells William that there is no escape, that this is the end, that the fire will consume everything. But Henry also addresses himself. He acknowledges his own role in creating the technology that made the horror possible. He accepts responsibility for his partnership with William Afton, for not seeing what William was doing, for not stopping the crimes before they destroyed so many lives. Henry's final act is one of atonement. He burns himself along with the animatronics, choosing to die rather than live with the knowledge of what his creations became. It's a suicide, but it's also a sacrifice. A father choosing to join his daughter in death, a creator destroying his creations and himself to end the nightmare. The soul's release is not shown directly, but it's implied in the peaceful imagery that follows the fire. The children trapped for so long finally move on. They find whatever comes after death, whatever peace exists beyond the physical world. Charlotte Emily, who had been trying to protect children for decades, can finally rest. Michael Afton, who had been walking as a corpse for years, can finally die properly. The fire frees them all, ending their suffering, breaking the cycle of tragedy. But William Afton does not find peace. His consciousness, saturated with remnant, infused with decades of hatred and obsession, falls into ultimate custom night, a purgatory where he is hunted by twisted versions of the animatronics, killed repeatedly, experiencing death over and over without end. It's the perfect punishment for a man who sought immortality. He cannot die, but he cannot live either. He exists in a state of constant torment, experiencing the fear and pain he inflicted on others, trapped in a nightmare of his own creation, or perhaps ultimate custom. Night is not his final fate. Perhaps it's a transitional state, a punishment before his consciousness finds a new vessel. Because years later, William Afton returns as Glitchtrap, a digital entity born from scanning old circuit boards. He has evolved beyond the physical, becoming something that exists in code and data, something that can infect technology and minds. He is no longer bound by the limitations of a body, no longer vulnerable to fire or destruction. He's become an idea, a virus, a corrupting influence that can spread through digital networks. Glitchtrap's existence raises disturbing questions about the nature of consciousness and technology. If a soul can be digitized, if consciousness can exist as code, then what does that mean for humanity? Are we all potentially vulnerable to this kind of infection? Could our minds be uploaded, copied, manipulated? William Afton's transformation into Glitchtrap suggests that the boundary between human and machine, between physical and digital, is more permeable than we thought. And if William Afton can exist as a digital entity, then he is truly unkillable. He can be copied, backed up, distributed across multiple systems. He has achieved a form of immortality that is even more persistent than his physical remnant-infused consciousness. Vanessa's corruption by Glitchtrap shows how William Afton's evil adapts to new eras. He no longer needs to physically lure children into back rooms. He can now use technology to create followers, to manipulate minds, to turn ordinary people into killers. Vanessa becomes Vanny, wearing a rabbit costume that echoes the spring Bonnie suit William wore decades ago. She hunts children in a new setting, continuing William's work, perpetuating the cycle of horror. And she may not even fully understand what she's doing. Glitchtrap's influence is insidious, gradual, making her believe she's choosing her actions when she's actually being controlled. The franchise's expansion into new media, novels, films, additional games, continues to explore the tragedy from different angles. Each new entry adds layers to the lore, yet reveals new details about the characters, shows new consequences of William Afton's crimes, but the core remains the same. Children were murdered, souls were trapped, and the man responsible achieved immortality at the cost of his humanity. The story grows and evolves, but the fundamental tragedy never changes. The community's engagement with the lore is itself a phenomenon. Millions of players have spent countless hours analysing the games, piecing together the timeline and debating theories about the characters and events. The lore is deliberately fragmented and cryptic, requiring players to work together to understand the full story. This collaborative storytelling creates a sense of shared discovery, of collectively uncovering a dark truth. The community becomes part of the story, investigators trying to solve a decades-old mystery, and trying to understand what happened to the children and why. But this engagement also raises ethical questions. Are we, as players and fans, exploiting the tragedy for entertainment? Are we complicit in the same way Fazbear's Fright was complicit, turning real suffering within the story's universe into a game? The franchise is aware of this tension, and sometimes addresses it directly, showing how corporations as individuals profit from tragedy, how horror becomes commodified, how suffering becomes entertainment. We are meant to be uncomfortable with our own enjoyment of the story, to question why we find horror compelling, to recognise that our fascination with death and tragedy says something about human nature. The enduring appeal of Five Nights at Freddy's lies in this complexity. It's not just a horror game with jump scares. It's a tragedy that asks profound questions about mortality, consciousness, justice, and the nature of evil. It's a story that respects its audience's intelligence, trusting players to piece together the narrative, to understand the implications, to grapple with the ethical and philosophical questions it raises. And it's a story that continues to evolve, finding new ways to explore its central themes, new angles on the tragedy, new manifestations of the horror. William Afton's legacy is not just the children he murdered or the family he destroyed. His legacy is the question he forces us to confront. What would we sacrifice for immortality? Would we harm others to extend our own existence? Would we treat human lives as expendable in pursuit of our goals? Most of us would say no, would insist we could never do what William Afton did. But the story asks us to consider how obsession develops, how small compromises lead to larger ones, how the pursuit of impossible goals can gradually erode our humanity until we become monsters without realizing it. The children's legacy is different. They represent innocence destroyed, potential unfulfilled, lives cut short by someone else's ambition. They remind us of the cost of evil, of the real human suffering that results from one person's selfish choices. They are not just victims. They are individuals with names and personalities and families who loved them. Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, Cassidy, Charlotte, Elizabeth, the crying child. Each one deserves to be remembered, to be mourned, to be honoured. Their deaths were not inevitable or necessary, they were murdered, and that matters. The story of Five Nights at Freddy's is ultimately about consequences. Every action has consequences that ripple outward, affecting more people than we can imagine. William Afton's decision to pursue immortality destroyed his family, murdered innocent children, corrupted his partner's life's work, and created a cycle of horror that persists across generations. Henry Emily's decision to partner with William, made with good intentions, led to decades of tragedy. Michael Afton's childhood prank killed his brother and defined his entire existence. Even small actions, children locking the puppet in its box, employees failing to properly maintain spring lock suits, had catastrophic consequences. This is what makes the law truly disturbing. It shows us that we are all connected, that our actions affect others in ways we cannot predict or control, that tragedy can result from choices that seemed reasonable at the time. It reminds us to be careful with our ambitions, to consider the potential consequences of our actions, to value human life above our personal goals. It warns us that obsession is dangerous, that refusing to accept natural limits can lead to disaster, that treating others as means to our ends is the first step toward becoming a monster. The animatronics wait in the darkness, eternal guardians of this truth. They are monuments to tragedy, reminders of innocence lost, symbols of the price we pay when we forget our humanity. They will continue to haunt us, not because they are evil, but because they represent something we must never forget. That children died, that families were destroyed, that one man's obsession created a hell that trapped everyone it touched. This is the disturbing lore of Five Nights at Freddy's, and it will endure as long as we remember the lessons it teaches.